When we talk about the American soldier in World War II, we talk about the heroes of Omaha Beach, the paratroopers holding the line at Bastogne, and the flag raisers of Iwo Jima. We talk about the greatest generation, a monolithic force of unquestioning patriots who marched across oceans to save the world. But war is an industrial meat grinder, and not every man who was fed into it was a hero. Some were simply terrified boys who reached their absolute psychological breaking point. The stress of constant artillery fire, freezing trenches, and seeing friends torn apart caused massive psychological casualties. During the Second World War, the United States military convicted over 21,000 soldiers of desertion. The punishment for abandoning your post in a time of war, under the Articles of War, is theoretically death. 49 of those men were handed death sentences by military courts. Yet, when the dust settled and the war ended, only one single American soldier had actually been marched into a courtyard, tied to a wooden post, and shot to death by his own countrymen. Out of millions who served and tens of thousands who ran, he was the only one. His name was Private Eddie Slovik, and his death remains the most controversial, uncomfortable military execution in modern American history. To understand why Eddie Slovik became the ultimate scapegoat, you have to look at who he was long before he was forced to put on the uniform. He wasn't a warrior. He was a small-time, unlucky, profoundly insecure kid from the hard streets of Detroit. Growing up in the Great Depression, Slovik fell into a bad crowd. By the time he was a teenager, but he had a petty criminal record for stealing loose change from a bakery and joyriding in a stolen car. He was caught, convicted, and spent time in a Michigan reformatory. Because of his time in prison when the war broke out, the draft board initially classified him as 4F, morally unfit for military service. Slovik was absolutely thrilled. He had no desire to fight. With his civilian freedom secured, he got a steady job at a plumbing company, married a woman who worked at a local factory named Antoinette, and settled down. For the first time in his chaotic life, Eddie Slovik was happy. He had a wife, a home, and a future, completely insulated from the global slaughter happening across the Atlantic. But by 1944, the American war machine was bleeding out. The invasion of Europe was chewing up infantrymen at an appalling, unsustainable rate. Desperate for warm bodies to replace the dead, the military suddenly lowered its moral and physical standards. Slovik's world collapsed. He was reclassified as 1A. He was drafted, handed an M1 rifle, put on a troop transport ship, and shipped to the European theater as a replacement infantryman. From the moment he put the uniform on, he was paralyzed by fear. He told everyone who would listen that he was too scared to fight, that he couldn't fire a gun at another human being, and that if they put him on the line, he would run. Nobody listened. The army just needed bodies. Slovik was funneled into the infamous American replacement system, where moving through replacement depots, known bitterly by the GIs as Repel-Deppels. Unlike the paratroopers or early infantry divisions who trained together for years and formed tight bonds of brotherhood, replacements were treated like spare parts. They were shoved into the gaps of shattered units, often not even knowing the names of the men in their foxholes before the artillery started falling. In August 1944, Slovik was assigned to the 28th Infantry Division. The 28th was affectionately known as the Keystone Division, but after what they had just been through in the horrific, dark woods of the Hurtgen Forest, the men called it the Bloody Bucket. They were a shattered, traumatized unit. They had been chewed to pieces by German artillery, tree bursts, and entrenched machine guns. En route to join them on the front lines, Slovik and a friend came under heavy artillery fire. Terrified, they dug in and became separated from their detachment. For For 6 weeks, they sheltered behind the lines with a Canadian military police unit. Slovik made himself useful, cooking meals and cleaning. But eventually, the Canadians had to turn him over to the Americans. When he finally rejoined his unit, his commander told him that no charges would be filed. He was given a clean slate. But the brief taste of artillery fire had utterly broken whatever fragile resolve Slovik had left. He informed his commanding officer, Captain Ralph Grotta, that if he was sent into combat, he would run away. Grotta told him to stop talking nonsense, handed him a rifle, and ordered him to his post. Instead of following orders, Eddie Slovik did something practically unheard of in the history of warfare. He walked away from his unit, found an American military cook in the rear, and handed him a handwritten note on a piece of scrap paper. It was a full, blunt, undeniable confession. He wrote, "I told my commanding officer my story. I said that if I had to go out there again, I'd run away. He said there was nothing he could do for me, so I ran away again, and I'll run away again if I have to go out there." Slovik was playing a calculated, desperate game. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that thousands of men were going AWOL in Paris, hiding out in the rear, deserting their posts. He knew they were being court-martialed and thrown into military prisons. To Slovik, a warm, the safe prison cell in the rear sounded like heaven compared to having his limbs blown off in the freezing mud of Germany. He wanted the court-martial. He wanted to go to jail. When Slovik's court-martial convened in November 1944, a panel of 9 staff officers presided over his case. He was offered multiple chances by military lawyers to tear up the confession, pick up his rifle, and go back to his unit with no permanent consequences. He steadfastly refused. He chose to stand by his confession. The tribunal unanimously sentenced him to death. But even then, Slovik wasn't worried. He knew the unwritten rule of the U.S. Army. They didn't shoot their own men. Death sentences were essentially an administrative tool to scare soldiers, and they were always commuted to a dishonorable discharge and hard labor by the higher-ups. But Eddie Slovik's timing was catastrophically bad. By December 1944, the Germans launched a massive, desperate winter offensive that caught the Allies completely by surprise, the Battle of the Bulge. American casualties were horrific. Divisions were being overrun. Morale was collapsing, and soldiers were abandoning their posts in the freezing snow at an alarming rate. Major General Norman "Dutch" Cotta, the battle-hardened commander of the 28th Division, was watching his lines disintegrate. When Slovik's plea for clemency reached Cotta's desk, the general didn't see a terrified kid from Detroit who needed psychiatric help. He saw a contagion. If word got out that a soldier could simply hand in a polite note and escape the freezing hell of the front lines for a cozy prison cell, the entire army might drop their weapons and walk away. The Cotta rejected the plea. The appeal went all the way up the chain of command, finally landing on the desk of the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower was staring down the barrel of the worst crisis of the war in Europe. He needed to hold the line at all costs. He agreed with Cotta's brutal assessment. They needed to make a horrific, undeniable example out of someone. They needed a scapegoat. Eisenhower signed the execution warrant. On the bitterly cold morning of January 31st, 1945, in the French village of Sainte-Marie-aux-Mines, Private Eddie Slovik was led into a walled courtyard. A firing squad of 12 American soldiers, armed with M1 Garands, was lined up. Following military tradition, one rifle contained a blank round, but so no man would know for absolute certainty if he had fired the fatal shot that killed an American citizen. Slovik was strapped tightly to a thick wooden post. A black hood was placed over his head. An army doctor pinned a small white target directly over his heart. A Catholic chaplain, Father Carl Cummings, spoke with him in his final moments. Slovik's last words were chilling in their tragic clarity. He didn't curse his country, nor did he beg for his life. He simply said, "They're not shooting me for deserting the United States Army. Thousands of guys have done that. They just need to make an example out of somebody, and I'm it because I'm an ex-con. I used to steal things when I was a kid, and that's what they are shooting me for." At 10:04 a.m., the order was given, and the deafening volley of M1 Garand fire echoed off the stone walls of the French courtyard. Eddie Slovik slumped against the ropes. The doctor stepped forward, checked his pulse, and pronounced him dead. The United States military was acutely aware of how terrible this would look to the American public. Slovik's execution was essentially buried. When the war ended, his widow, Antoinette, was told only that her husband had died in the European theater. She was denied his WWII life insurance and his pension. For years, she believed he had died a hero's death in combat. It wasn't until 1954, when journalist William Bradford Huey uncovered the truth and wrote a book about the incident, that Antoinette learned her husband had been executed by his own government. The revelation sparked immense outrage, adding insult to injury. The army had buried Slovik in Plot E at the WWII American Cemetery in France. Plot E is a hidden, walled-off section of the cemetery where the military buried soldiers who had been executed for heinous crimes like rape and murder. They buried a terrified kid from Detroit who never fired his weapon alongside serial killers, ensuring his legacy was one of ultimate disgrace. Antoinette spent the rest of her life, and all of her money, petitioning 7 different U.S. presidents to pardon her husband and return his body to American soil. In the 1970s, Frank Sinatra even bought the rights to Slovik's story to make a movie, but the political backlash was so severe that he was forced to abandon the project. Antoinette died in 1979, never having seen her husband's remains returned. It wasn't until 1987, 42 years after his execution, that the U.S. government finally allowed Eddie Slovik's remains to be exhumed from Plot E. He was flown back to Detroit and buried next to Antoinette. The story of Eddie Slovik strips away the glamorous Hollywood veneer of the good war. It forces us to confront the brutal, cold calculus of military command. In order to force tens of thousands of men to walk into the meat grinder of Nazi Germany, the United States Army had to prove that the terror waiting for them in the rear could be just as lethal as the enemy at the front. Eddie Slovik died not because he was a traitor, and not because he aided the enemy. He died for what the army was terrified other men might do. He was the scapegoat of the Ardennes, a tragic casualty of friendly fire authorized by the highest office in the military.